If all of your characters are either completely good or completely evil, you are missing out on the most interesting part of human nature. I'm Sarah Hoffman, the founder of Inimitable Books, and today I'm going to be talking about morally gray characters. Now, I have already covered creating compelling protagonists with rich internal lives and formidable villains who challenge them in previous videos, and I will leave those linked up in a card. But what about the characters who live somewhere in between on the moral spectrum? The ones who aren't purely heroic or purely villainous. I see a lot of writers who are afraid to give their characters real, unlikable flaws, especially their protagonists. They worry that if their main character does something questionable, readers won't like them anymore. Or they go too far in the other direction and make characters who are so likable that they are boring because they're not flawed at all. Morally gray characters aren't just characters with flaws. Everyone has flaws, as should your characters. But morally gray ones are fictional people whose flaws and virtues are in constant tension with each other. These characters make choices that serve both good and selfish purposes simultaneously. They have values that sometimes even contradict each other. They're capable of both kindness and cruelty. And here's what distinguishes them from a flawed character. Their moral ambiguity is central to their journey, not incidental. Their choices will force readers to wrestle with their own moral judgments, but we're not just watching them overcome that flaw. We are questioning what we would do in that situation more so than we even do with straight up villain. Think of Tyrion Lannister, Lisbeth Salander, Dexter Morgan, and V in V for Vendetta. These characters do things that are genuinely wrong, not just mistakes or errors in judgment. But we understand why they do these things, we see their logic, and even when we don't agree with it, but we keep reading and rooting for them because we don't know how they will end their moral journey. We all have moral codes, but we all have blind spots and exceptions in those codes, even if we wish we didn't. If you give your character two or more deeply held values that sometimes conflict with each other, you are creating an inner conflict that we talked a lot about in our previous video. And because their choices might not be purely heroic for this morally gray character, you have a lot more potential interest than you maybe do with a hero or a villain, because ultimately a villain's actions have to be villainous and ultimately a hero's actions have to be heroic. In The Storm Gathers by Malin Holiday, which is published by Inimitable Books, our three main point of view characters are morally gray women. But the one I want to talk about today is Rhea Toma, a royal guard who is secretly scheming the downfall of the king she serves. Again, this might sound like she's a villain, but she's not, because she's not sadistic and she's not actively harming innocent people. She still has a moral code, but even with all this deception and betrayal that she is personally carrying out, she values honesty and loyalty, two things that are strongly tested when an old friend appears but is working on the enemy side. This technique of opposing values works best when you explore the consequences of these choices. Don't let your character make a hard choice and then move on without any reflection. It's even better if you have reflection in advance of them making the final decision, where they are thinking through how their choice will affect them. Show readers how it changes their relationship with their values and those around them. Maybe they start to question whether or not one value is really as important as they thought, or will abandon it completely in favor of something else. Some of the most interesting character moments happen when someone does the right thing, but for selfish or questionable reasons. Kaz Brekker in the Six of Crows series rescues Inej Gaffa from sexual slavery, but he does it because he needs her skills as a spy and a thief for his criminal crew, not because he just does it out of the goodness of his heart. Similarly, when he takes on the ice court heist that could prevent a war and save many Grisha lives, it's because he wants money and revenge. Does that make him a villain? The answer is no, because he's still saving people's lives. The action is heroic, but the motivation is self-serving. And this creates more complexity because readers have to wrestle with how they feel about him. They might not like him in some moments and really love him in others, and you can do the same thing for your character. This idea also works in reverse too. Jean Valjean from Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and then the musical based on that book, steals bread to feed his sister's starving children. The action is theft, but the motivation is altruistic. And later, he breaks parole to build a new life where he can help others. His actions are criminal, but they serve genuinely noble purposes. And what's great about both of these versions is that it forces readers to ask, does motivation matter if the outcome is good? And do actions matter if the outcome is good? Most people would say motivation does matter. We definitely judge people on whether or not they do a good thing for a good reason versus if they do a good thing for a more selfish reason. But if someone saves a life, then a life is still saved. The key is acknowledging the complexity. Don't let your character do good things for bad reasons without reflection. Have them question their own motives. Create tension between the character's self-image and their actual behavior. That internal struggle between who they want to be and who they actually are, that's where morally gray characters live. You should also give your character an area of life where their moral compass doesn't work properly, something they can't see clearly about themselves or their situation. Maybe they're incredibly fair and just in most situations, but they have a blind spot when it comes to family. Blind spots make characters feel real because we all have areas where we rationalize our behavior that we would condemn if we saw it in others. The journey of a morally gray character often involves confronting their blind spots, but are they going to double down on them or change their ways? Either way, the blind spot gives you opportunities to create conflict and growth for your moral characters. You should also consider that the blind spot should connect to something deeper in the character's psychology. Another great thing to do with morally gray characters is show their descent into the darker side of the spectrum. You can have them start out pretty heroic. Show small concessions and compromises until they become bigger ones, so the reader can watch them slide gradually into this moral grayness. With Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein taking threads and the internet at large by storm, I thought it was a perfect opportunity to discuss Dr. Victor Frankenstein. I'm going to be discussing the book because I have not yet seen the movie. I did consider putting Victor in our villains video because if you've read the book, you know that he actually is the villain, not the monster he created. But for the sake of this discussion, he is a morally gray character because Victor starts with noble intentions. He wants to advance science, help humanity, but he makes escalating choices. First, he isolates himself for his work. That's not too bad on its own. But he continues his experiments despite unease. He abandons his creation out of horror instead of taking responsibility. Each refusal to help the monster he created leads to deaths of people he loves, but he still doesn't take any responsibility for what has happened or any actions that could stop the monster until he becomes so consumed with a desire for that he becomes as monstrous as the creature he is fighting. The first compromise should feel minor for your character, and it should be easily justified. But then the next one should be a little bit harder, a little bit worse, but they've already crossed the first line, so why wouldn't they keep going? Each compromise makes the next one easier. This technique is powerful because it shows how good people can end up doing bad things, and it's not about being evil. It's about making a series of choices that seem reasonable at the time. Essentially, they are saying the ends justify the means. And then they have to deal with the consequences in some way and the psychological weight that they are accumulating. Again, you want to force readers to think about, where would I have stopped in this journey? What compromise would have been too far for me? Am I as certain of my moral boundaries as I think I am? That's the main point of morally gray character. Sometimes the most morally gray moments come from doing the right thing, but at a painful cost. My favorite novel that I read as a child was The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, and if you are thinking I've never heard of that book, you're probably not in the United States and know the book instead as Northern Lights. It is the first book in the His Dark Materials trilogy and was made into a movie and then a TV show. I have problems with both adaptations, but I won't be going into that here. Now, I want to give spoilers because what I'm about to talk about is a huge one. The main character, Lyra Belacqua, rescues her friend Roger and a bunch of other kidnapped children from Bolvanger. And that is the right thing to do. She is saving innocent kids from a horrible experiment that has ended in the deaths of multiple children. But doing so costs her the maternal love and safety that she so desperately craved. She could have stayed with that character and had the relationship, but doing so would mean ignoring the evil that person was doing, abandoning her friend and other children. Doing the right thing has cost her dearly. Remember, when the right choice is free, it's not a real choice because there was never a debate. What makes a character morally gray in these situations is that they are actually tempted to make the wrong choice. They seriously consider taking the easier, self-serving, more comfortable path. They should wrestle with their decision, and they might eventually choose, at least initially. If they continue to choose wrong and never change, they start becoming a villain rather than morally gray. But the key is to show the internal struggle. You don't want your character to thoughtlessly make their choices without any consideration or without any difficulty. Show readers what it costs them emotionally to even consider the pros and cons of each option. And then show us their rationalizations as they decide what they are going to do. And whether they ultimately choose right or wrong needs to have consequences. This way, they are living with the choice they made and not just moving on. I talked about giving your character a blind spot where their personal code or that allows them to justify their actions is off even for themselves. But let's talk about that moral code that they have. It's a framework that allows them to do everything they are doing. Because if they can't justify anything, then they would hopefully not make those choices or they fall into villainhood. I mentioned Dexter Morgan earlier in this video, but for this example, I want to talk about the main character Abby in Mother Mercy by Chandra Arthur. Like Dexter, she's a serial killer who only goes after bad, abusive people who absolutely deserve what's coming to them. But what she does to them is stomach-turning, violent, sadistic, horrific. But she's not a villain and is instead a morally gray character because she goes after bad people. She's doing bad things for a good reason, and her personal code is ultimately a good one, even though it is incredibly permissive of violence that most of us would never consider. The most important aspect of your character's justification system is that it should feel like a real navigation system that tells your character what is moral and is not just an excuse for you as the writer to push your character into making certain choices. Readers need to understand how your character got from their background to their system and from their system to their behavior, even if they disagree with the system. Here are some mistakes I see with morally gray characters. Surface level contradictions without any real depth. If you're making your character flawed but likable, where they have quirky imperfections but never do anything genuinely questionable, that's not really morally gray. You can't forget that your reader still needs someone to root for. I talked earlier in this video about how some people are worried that if they make their hero do anything unlikable, their character immediately becomes unlikable. But a morally gray character can't be morally bankrupt. Then they're just a villain. Your morally gray character should still have qualities that make readers care about what happens to them. They can be selfish, violent, manipulative, but there should be something that makes readers want to follow their story and not just wish for their downfall. Maybe it's vulnerability. Maybe it's moments of unexpected kindness. Maybe it's just that they're interesting enough to watch even when they're making terrible choices. But there needs to be something. Another mistake you don't want to do is make every character morally gray. The joy of seeing character interactions is when you have a mix. You need characters who can provide contrast to each other. And you don't get that if everyone is a hero, everyone is a villain, or everyone is morally gray. Avoiding consequences is another mistake. If your morally gray character does bad things but never suffers for it, either internally or from external consequences, they're going to start feeling like a villain rather than a morally gray character to your readers. Their choices have to have consequences. They need to actually feel them. You can't show a character making understandable but wrong choices while having no morality with the story as a whole, because then what does it matter what choices your character is making? In fact, you should be acknowledging that those choices are wrong, at least to the reader, even if the character themselves is experiencing a blind spot. The narrative needs to make clear that what they did might have been for a good reason without endorsing it. Another mistake is one that I talked about in our villains video, but I'm going to reiterate it here. You should not be using trauma as a get out of jail free card for your characters. Yes, trauma informs character behavior, it helps us understand their present, but trauma doesn't excuse everything. People make choices based on where they come from, but someone who has been abused can either become an abuser themselves or become a protector of other abused people. And the last mistake I see is writers have morally gray characters who are doing everything else correctly, but they don't give their characters a moment of moral clarity. Even morally gray characters need to acknowledge that what they're doing is maybe not that great. Because if not, and they think everything they're doing is correct, then they are just a villain. To create your own morally gray character, you need to find two of their values and then find a way to pit them against each other. Write a scene where they have to choose between one of them and show them debating the pros and cons of picking one over the other. Both values need to be genuinely important to them, and the consequences of picking either choice needs to be serious. If you can work in what their blind spot is and how they rationalize what they are doing is even better. If you have someone call them out for hypocrisy in the scene you are writing for this experiment, how they react. Are they going to get defensive, or are they going to just get uncomfortable with the self-recognition but actually take the criticism on board? A related but potentially separate exercise you can do is map out the moral escalation you want for your characters. Start with the small compromise, but then show each step that will get them into darker shades of morality. What's the first step? What's the next? And where is the line that they start really noticing that they are changing, but stop? And in that moral escalation, be sure to show your character's justification system. If your readers can say, I don't agree with what they did, but I understand why they did it, you've got a morally gray character that readers appreciate. We have a character development PDF guide available for purchase through our Ko-fi page, but you can get an expanded version with other worksheets and exercises for free when you join the Inimitable Writing community, complete with our Query Ready course. Q&As with me, someone who has worked in publishing for a decade, as well as guests in the future who are also in the industry. It goes over more than just how to write a query letter. It includes how to revise your manuscript, how to position your novel correctly in the market, and links for both are in the description below. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the Inimitable Books channel so you don't miss the next video in this playlist, where I'll be breaking down how to write a multi-POV story without confusing your readers. Because once you've created all of these complex characters, no matter where they sit on the morality spectrum, you might want to give readers multiple perspectives on your story. What's your character's biggest blind spot? And how do they rationalize it when others eventually question it? Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.